presentations from Zayda and Saima, and then we can have a discussion afterwards.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Zayda Ashraf and I'm the founder and CEO, I like to call it, of She-Wise charity. We are a UK registered charity. We were sort of conceptualized in, can you hear me or do I need a, I've got quite loud voice actually. So the organisation was conceptualized in 2015, really after my own personal journey of entrepreneurship. I started my business in the catering industry literally from the back of my kitchen. And it was really to provide second income for my family, my young family. At the time, my husband was working in a full-time job, but like most families, you need two incomes. So it was really, I didn't really have any aspirations except bringing in that second income. But I discovered, I didn't know that I was embarking on a journey of self-discovery. The business started in 2000, and by the time 2008, we were the 7th largest food service in UK, and we were distributing over 250,000 ready-made meals across UK. So that was my journey of entrepreneurship. Sadly, that journey ended in 2008 when the financial meltdown happened. But it wasn't just the financial meltdown, it was also everything I had experienced as a South Asian woman and what success meant to me and how I obtained it. And that different phases and different stages of my journey somewhat represents what's happened, why She-Wise sort of came about. So I'm going to keep it really short, but in 2008, once I had lost the business, it went into administration. So I had lost a business which was worth in millions, but I also found myself as a single mom in a refuge with 2 children, and literally on the verge of bankruptcy. And when I got to that point, I really reflected on how did I get here? What were the reasons that contributed to my success and also my setbacks? So I am a survivor. I don't like to use the word survivor. I have experienced domestic abuse personally. Some of my learnings was that how does a woman who's sort of worked her way up to success, how does the society and her partners perceive her? And a lot of it was that the more successful I became, the more I saw people becoming more aggressive towards me, especially my partner. People's insecurities really started to come through, whether it was my partner or family members. So anyway, in 2015, I created the organization. During COVID, we had an influx of women coming to us with the issues around domestic abuse. Currently, we have over 300, I think, service users at the moment who use our services. We provide domestic abuse, mental wellness projects. All our projects come in 2 categories, either of intervention or prevention. As part of the intervention programs, we do advice and guidance and training on domestic abuse, which Simon will go through with you. And I just realised I haven't pressed the screen.
I know, and I just wanted to disturb you. You were in the I can go back to it, don't worry, you just can't.
So, in terms of, but the other thing, programs, what we do is the prevention programs. So we do a program called I Matter Too, which is really also looking at young girls, and we try to go into schools and we talk about issues, how you show up in relationships, how you manage relationships, even before they get into it. So there's a lot of work that we're doing, and Simon will also sort of discuss more about it. I just want to say thank you to Sabasi for inviting us in. We're really grateful. it is really important for us to create this awareness, because I think there's an epidemic out there and not enough people talk about it because there is a stigma attached to these things. And our efforts is really trying to make these conversations, normalizing them. And it's quite extraordinary that we always end up with women in the room where actually we need the men.
Yes.
So my urge to you and my message to you today is with this exhibition and campaign is, please try and have these conversations with your male friends, your partners, your brothers. You know, it's so important that we talk about this and not brush it under the carpet. And that's all I want to say. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you, Saida. I'm just going to go back on the slides and just show you a little bit. We have set some objectives. Objectives are to tell you about SheWise, which is what Saida has started. We will then move on to domestic abuse. How do we define domestic abuse? What are the challenges that women face when they're trying to leave an abusive relationship, and how those challenges are bigger, larger for women from South Asian and Middle Eastern community background, minority ethnic women. So we'll slowly go through that, and finally we'll end with Sujata, who will talk more about this particular project and the thoughts and ideas behind that. Okay, moving forward. Saida, we have covered that. You know who we are and what we are about. This is me. I'm the head of domestic abuse services at SheWise. As Saida has explained to you, that we offer various services to our clients. We do domestic abuse, mental health and well-being, skills development, entrepreneur skills, and our fifth category is women in prison. We're seeing a percentage of women from South Asian culture background. The number of women in prison is growing. Often these women are in prison not because of a crime that they have committed, but because they have taken the crime of someone else in the family. So we work with the women as they resettle and rebuild their lives into community. Under our Department of Domestic Abuse, one of our aims, or the aim, is to challenge and transform societal attitudes and beliefs so that we can make the journey of the next generation easier, so that they can manage to cope or get over domestic abuse in a better way than we did. So we are trying to raise awareness. We are trying to engage with communities, with faith settings, with local councils, with policymakers, anybody and everybody who would listen to us, to talk about domestic abuse and talk about the differences, and to say that this is not enough, the change needs to come, it's well overdue. Within our domestic abuse department, we have created a sub-department which is called Domestic Abuse Through the Lens of Creative Expression. Here we work with survivors through different mediums. So photography is one of the medium. The idea is to give survivors an opportunity to talk. A lot of feedback that we have from our clients has been that they feel invisible by the community, invisible by the service provider, invisible by the police. So by creating this department, we are giving them two things. We are giving them an opportunity to express, whether that is through creative writing, or through acting, or through photography, or through yoga. And simultaneously, we are collecting their voices so we can take it to a larger platform so that their voice is heard. 1,000 cuts is something that came out from here, but I will park 1,000 cuts for the moment. We will come back to it at the end. I'm going to talk a bit more about domestic abuse. Sorry, phone clicking. So domestic abuse in 2021, the Domestic Abuse Act was gosh, I've forgotten the word. It was upgraded, it was improved, and new regulations were brought in to give women survivors a bigger voice. The changes that came through, we talk about physical, sexual abuse, we talk about violence and threatening behavior. The new element here was more focused on controlling and coercive behavior. A full definition of what is coercive behavior has been given in the new act, and now a perpetrator can be charged for coercive behavior. There's also mention of psychological, emotional, and other forms of abuse. The abuse could be between anyone who is age 16 and above. It could be by your partner or a family member. The new act is recognizing abuse from family members. It is recognizing that abuse is not by just one member. There can be a whole team of people who can be abusing a woman in a relationship, and it's being mindful of that. We have some statistics. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to raise a few. So 1 in 5 adults in UK experiences domestic abuse once in their lifetime. When we break it down in terms of gender, then it's 1 in 4 women or 1 in 7 men. In fact, as I speak, the numbers have changed. It's 1 in 3 women now and not 4 that experiences domestic abuse once in their lifetime. Between 2 to 3 women are murdered every week. That's a very big, significant number. At this point in life, it's mind-boggling. When women are most at risk when in the first month of leaving an abusive relationship. So the kind of support women receive in the first month is fundamental in terms of risk assessment, in terms of safeguarding, in terms of making sure they are safe and hidden from the perpetrator. 1 in 5 children currently in UK are living in a home where there's a perpetrator. So this is where the next generation is being affected, and it's important that we take notice of this now. Domestic violence, domestic abuse. When somebody is affected by domestic abuse, it's not just 1 or 2 or 3 things. It's not just about being hit or being verbally abused. The domestic abuse affects the whole of you. It affects every element of your psyche, your body, your being. For example, physical effect. On a milder scale, you could have confusion about what's going on because of the games, the mind games the perpetrator is playing with you, to the extreme end where you are suffering from trauma and PTSD. Statistics tell us that when women leave an abusive relationship, 80% of the women have PTSD, but it is often not diagnosed. So there is so much going on inside that we don't know. In order to cope with the trauma within, survivors, victims find ways, coping mechanism. They can use, they can self-harm, they can go into substance misuse, drug dependency, etc. There are psychological effects from being low, depressed, mood swings, to being on the other side of the spectrum where you can be very aggressive, you can be very angry, you are losing your temper, you don't know what's going on inside your body. So a person can be going through a lot of emotions, and people around need to be mindful to say if somebody's behaving which is not atypical of their usual behavior, then what else is going on? Do they need someone to listen to them? Relationships, it impacts on your family relationship, your interpersonal relationship, effects on your education. When you're a young person, you are witnessing abuse taking place in your home. It's affecting you as a child psychologically. It's affecting how you perform, how you are coping with other people around you. So abuse affects you from every angle, in every way. And these are the things that one needs to be mindful about. Okay? Complexity of domestic abuse, why it's never so easy to leave. So I've used an example of an iceberg. There are things that are visible, and there are things that are going on underneath that even the victim themselves don't realize what's going on. So on the outside, there is abuse, there is physical, verbal, emotional abuse going on. There might be forced marriage going on, there might be honor-based violence, there might be digital online abuse going on. There might be police coming in and out of your house, but no action is being taken. All these things that are happening visibly on the surface are affecting the woman, the man, the victim internally, like the way I spoke in the slide before. But underneath, there are many thoughts that are going on inside the mind of a survivor that they don't talk about, that they don't realize, that stops them from leaving. These can be things like your mental health and physical health. Fear of leaving. If I leave, where do I go? This is the life I have known all my life, so what happens now? Immigration. That's an issue with many South Asian women. They've been brought here on a spousal visa. Once they leave, they have no identity, they have no legal status to remain here. So what do? Housing and money is a big issue. Often in an abusive relationship, the perpetrator takes charge of your whole being. You don't need to worry. Let me take care of the running of the logistics of the house. I'm paying the bill. You focus on the children and the home. So you have no money. You have no bank account. You may be on benefits, but everything is going in his account. So if I leave here, what happens? Then of course there are language barriers. There's distrust of police and other services. Homicide, custody battles. If I leave, where do my children go? Does he keep them? Do I keep them? How does it all work? All these thoughts are going on inside that are not visibly out there in the open. So there's a lot going on in the mind of the victim. Okay, now I'm only going to add more layers to it. So that's going on in the mind of an average white female, average white victim. Now, once you add color to that, once you add minority ethnicity to that, the layers increase. We have things like FGM, we have dishonor and shame. Honor and shame is a very big terminology for South Asian, Middle Eastern cultures. It's all about, you brought shame to my name, you brought dishonor to my name. If you are with him and being abused, that is okay. If you leave him, you are bringing dishonor. So women don't leave because they don't want to bring dishonor. When women do leave, then often the family would say, we don't want to have anything to do with you anymore because you have brought dishonor. Then the thoughts of suicidal thoughts kick in. That's where chronic depression kick in. That's where dependency on substance misuse kicks in. What do we have? Forced marriage, rejection from the partner and family members. Discrimination and racism. Women leave, their English is not very good, they're not able to articulate the depth of abuse, the depth of violence that they are experiencing. So often, or they do call the police because they have been abused, but then they are pressurized to drop the charges to give him another chance. So the police would come and say, police has the power with the new changes in the act. They have the power where they see this is a victim, domestic abuse is going on, she's not taking the action, but we can see it. They have the power to remove that woman and child from an abusive relationship. But in reality, it doesn't happen that way. It's very much, if you take your statement back, then we have no power and we stand back, which shouldn't be happening. So women go in this loop time after time, moving forward and backward. Statistics tell us that a woman experiencing domestic abuse will come forward and go back 7 times before she takes the plunge of leaving an abusive relationship. That's the figure for an average white female. For a woman from minority ethnic background, she will do 9 steps forward and backwards before she takes the plunge. So all these statistics get extra when it comes to the minority ethnic women. Many of the time, women in abusive relationships are living in a part of the brain which is known as the survival brain. It's at the back of our head, the reptilian brain, which was the first part of the brain to evolve, which was all about, if you go back to the cave ages, it was all about survival and feeding yourself. So when you're in an abusive relationship, women are often in that part of the brain. It's all about fight, flight, freeze. Those are the feelings and the instincts that kick in. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and these are the reasons what prevents women from leaving an abusive relationship. Okay.
Oh, that's me. I look good.
Good. Before I move on to Sujata, who will come and discuss more about our 1,000 Cuts exhibition and the thoughts behind it. Does anybody have any questions? Do they want to ask anything about domestic abuse or anything at all? Good.
Can I just ask, so if someone needs to use your services, how do they find out about you? Are they referred to you, or do they find out through the women's refuges?
Yeah, so we are working mainly from Hounslow. That's where our office is based, but we work pan-London. We advertise ourselves on social media. We get referrals through social prescribers, through NHS, through domestic abuse services. As part of my domestic abuse remit, I would sit at what is known as the one-stop shop. Each council, each borough has their own one-stop shop where victims of domestic abuse can go and raise their concern, and then they get signposted to when they develop or relevant services. So we are part of that. We also sit, my colleague Saida sits at the job centre once a week. So if there are referrals coming through that way, they could come. So referrals can be made to us directly by individuals. They can be made through GPs or any other services, or they can self-refer them to ourselves through our advice line or social media. Yeah, and our website. Yes. Okay, lovely. Sujata, it's all yours. Thank you. We're just going to have a little changeover in the video that we have before starting.
Do you have any program targeted to men audiences? Thinking about how to bring this?
So it is on our bigger scheme of things. Obviously, domestic violence, if there's a male victim, and I do have some male victims on our system. We work predominantly with women right now because we are a small organization and we are growing. Yes. But as we grow, we will be working on that as well. As part of our raising awareness, we are working in collaboration with local councils and schools to raise awareness on domestic abuse. So perpetrator programs is on the list. We're working on freedom programs. We're working on mother-child relationship programs after they leave in abusive relationships. And we're also going into schools to train the staff on domestic abuse. And our angle is that domestic abuse and minority ethnic, how is it different? What more does one need to do? So for example, Freedom Program is very much written from a white British perspective. So we are adapting that to bring in other cultural aspects into it. And we're working with Hounslow Council on that. So yeah, perpetrator program will come in due course as well. Thank you.
Firstly, thank you so much, Sema, for letting us showcase the work here. How cool is that? I can say I've exhibited at British Library. How many people get that opportunity? So thanks so much, immensely. And Shiva is for actually putting this whole thing together. I don't think it's easy for survivors to speak and discuss their individual narratives. But what I felt as a survivor myself and also as an artist was that in human spaces, in the art world, in conversations, I think survivors are not being able to get that dignity of existence. You know, our narratives, they are just not coming out. We just become a number in a UN survey, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men, but our individual stories just do not get the ability or the possibility to be shared. So that was the idea behind this series. I'm not very good at talking. I'd love it if we can have an open conversation. Please feel free to ask me any questions. I would like to read just short snippets from the interviews that I have had, the one-on-ones I've had with the survivors. I don't want to bombard all of you. You know, before I was coming here, I had a conversation with a friend who happens not to be a survivor. And she said, don't dump your sadness on everyone. So I promised her that I will not dump my sadness or any of our sadness on everybody. Everyone should go away from here feeling a lot of light and a possibility that it's all right to choose to live in an abusive relationship, and it's all right to choose to walk out of it. My mother chose to live in it. She passed away in 2019. For me, being a domestic abuse survivor is the act of listening to her frail body being dragged by her hair through the cemented floor in my house. And that was the music that I heard when I was inside her womb. So that became the idea of music for me, you know, that sound that was her body rubbing through the cemented floor. And she chose to stay there. She chose to stay in there on the floor. And I respect her for that because she made that conscious choice. So for me, my mother is not a victim. She is a survivor. And which is why the one thing that I consciously chose to do as a part of creating this series was to remind myself, remind the survivors that we are not victims. So never think of yourself as a victim. Two things, one observation that I made and one observation that I would want you as individuals, men, women, queer, transgender, non-binary, whosoever, whatever gender identity you relate to, in your relationships, look keenly at the power dynamic. Look at it with enough interest to see when is it tipping to the other side. Make sure that you're conscious of the smallest of things that could turn into abuse and you know consciously how to stop it. It could be your partner continuously telling you, you cannot open the curtains of the house because I don't like it when the curtains are open, the light is too strong. It is that choice that you are not allowed to make, that you are not allowed to open the curtains in the house. It's very small, very minor things that you will not pay attention to. That's something that I realized in my conversation with the survivors. Most of them told me, most of the days I did not notice it because I was taught that marriage is compromise. I was taught that it will take a while to adjust to each other. I was taught that I need to put his needs ahead of my own needs. So all of these historic, genetic, cultural predispositions that we come up with in our own partnerships, try to be conscious of the presence of them and try to break that cycle of abuse. If you're not able to do it for yourself, please try to do it for your next generation. That's all that we can really do if we are not able to do it for ourselves. And while my mother stayed in that marriage, and she chose to live with the scars, the one thing she did for me very consciously was to break that cycle of abuse for me. And I'm so grateful to have learned that love is not somebody wielding their power over you, but love is for you to have the ability to live and fly the way you want to fly. And I'm grateful to have a partner who lets me do that. So I've made sure that I asked him to come here today. And yes, please feel free to ask me any questions, guys. I will let the images do the talking in the meanwhile. No, yeah, I think my light is dying. Anybody has any questions?
Sujata,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about how you chose to consider the subjects that you did?
In what sense?
Like, you've got how many people? How did you choose these?
It wasn't choice. It wasn't choice. It's very, very difficult for survivors to talk. There's a lot of stigma, especially in the minority communities. So all thanks to this wonderful lady right here. She enabled this whole process. She put me in touch with a lot of survivors. We had initially quite a few workshops. Some of them, like Saima mentioned, decided it's not for them. And so they consciously chose to walk out and not participate. And some of them, I'm grateful that they agreed to participate. So it's an ongoing series. I hope to be able to bring as many narratives as possible out in the open, because really we need the dignity to exist in our stories. And if it's okay, I could quickly just read a couple that I have in front of me. I'm not naming names, and it was a conscious effort to decouple the stories from the images to retain their identity, and also their story of abuse is not all of them. It's just a part of them. So this is the story of Pinion Punk. She says, my partner hit me in front of his entire family and left the room in rage. My mother-in-law summoned her other son to go offer water or juice to my angry husband. While I stood there staring at her, the act of normalizing abuse was so subtle. On most days I did not even notice it. On other days I ignored it, and then there were days when I justified it. Then there's this wonderful survivor. She says, I was a very simple, quiet girl who always did what her family asked her to. I was God's cow. In South Asian culture, there is a word called Allah ki gaye, which means a very simple, very innocent person. So she said, I was God's cow. The abuse became so intense in my marriage that self-harm was my only weapon. But I don't know how one day I got the strength in me that when he raised his hand in front of me, on me in front of his children, I just picked up the stick and I ran after him. And I started hitting the door so hard that the door almost broke. From that day, he did not raise his hand on me ever. And that is the day I realized that abuse is nothing but a game of power. So you choose whether you want to hold the power in your hand or you want to give it over to somebody else. There's another really beautiful story. She says, I married 2 people in my life. First marriage was because we were 7 daughters and 4 sons. Anyone who came in through the door, my father would give our hand to them in marriage. My second marriage was because of honor. Both men were the same. Both let me be abused by other men. It brought shame to my family. My family locked me up in a room for 3 months. I tried killing myself several times because these people pushed me to kill myself. Then there is Mujhse Mulaqat, we call it finding me. She says, one day my father said, I have fixed your marriage. If you refuse, I will divorce your mother. When the abuse got too much in my marriage, my father said to me, in our family, no one has ever divorced. So if you choose divorce, I will divorce your mother too. But my mother said, what is happening to me, let it happen. Do not take it on your soul. I wasn't able to help you earlier, but I cannot let you die like this. Don't return to that man for my sake. And so I left. I will finish my rambling with this, and I will absolutely let all of you ask if there are any questions. It's a very heavy topic. Apologies for that. But yes, each one of them have come out into open light. Yes, Ruby.
I just wanted to ask you to explain a little bit more about the abuse you felt as the baby in the womb.
Yes.
And you touched on that because that's really important and nobody understands it.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about what that means for you?
There's a lot of generational trauma, you know, and what I found out through this series was patterns that you see. There is a pattern within the communities in South Asia, in Africa and in the Middle East. There is a pattern of colonization, and what colonization has done over the years to sort of perpetuate and extend the hand to domestic abuse. Nobody really talks about it. It's a deeper study one needs to do. Also, what I found patterns in my conversations with the survivors was, unfortunately, the relationship between domestic abuse and physical and mental disabilities and neurodiversity in the children that are born of families that have experienced abuse. These are again research topics that need to be focused on, funding needed for it, putting it out in the room and in the universe. So yes, so children, the impact is huge, and also it's incredible. I read that the understanding of domestic abuse by our British government is that children who have seen abuse while growing up, even though they are not 18 years old but are little, they become domestic abuse survivors as well. So that is very powerful, something that is only I think possible here in the UK. Not every other country has an understanding of domestic abuse or a formal understanding of domestic abuse in that sense. I think South Asia and Middle Eastern countries are still fighting for that space for survivors of domestic abuse, specifically children coming from those families. They are disadvantaged hugely because they come up with an understanding of what love really is. I had one of the survivors tell me that she said that I wish my mother was a parent like I am, and then I would never have been where I am standing today. And she said that after several abusive relationships, today I am in a marriage where my partner really loves me, but it is very uncomfortable for me to experience that love, because for me, love means being abused, and my partner does not abuse me. So there again is that discord between him and me, because I want him to abuse me now, you know. So there is that sort of cyclic nature of abuse for a child who's experienced it while growing up. And yeah, for me it's important to have broken that cycle for myself and for my daughter. Yes?
I just wanted to comment on when you were talking about the ways in which domestic violence can trickle down into different ways.
Yes.
I just wanted to note that I appreciate you mentioning the range of, I think it was psychological was the word used, the range of psychological things that it can affect. I think when you were saying, you know, women can become really angry or rude or aggressive or XYZ, it's important to talk about our narrative of the perfect victim or the perfect survivor. I know that when I talk to my community or my parents about intimate partner violence, there's a very specific idea of what we want a woman who's survived that to look like, to act.
Absolutely.
You know, ideas of gratefulness or being just whatever idea we've concocted as a society, both culturally and on a larger scale, of the perfect victim. And I think having that idea is really damaging because it really doesn't let us fully support people who don't act in the ways that we think are appropriate or are deserving of our support. So I just wanted to comment that I appreciated you bringing that up. I think it's really important.
I am so grateful you brought up this point. You know, Shibai, Saima, Saida, Salma, who's not present today, and myself, we have been putting this work out in closed community groups, focus groups, and asking for feedback, and we are sort of chronicling that feedback with us. And one of the feedback we received was, it's surprising to look at these portraits. These women are so beautiful, they look so beautiful to me, and one sort of has a perfect image of what a domestic abuse survivor would look like, and they don't really fit into that. So that just goes to tell you that anybody can be a survivor. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much for bringing this point up. And also, one other thing that I realized during the conversation with my survivors were, they said most of the time we did not even know that it is happening to us. The most important thing for each one of us as individuals, whether we are the perpetrator or we are the one who is bearing the brunt of that act, we need to have a conversation with the self. We need to ask ourselves that what dynamic we have in this relationship, is it balanced or is the power going up and down? And you know, that conversation with the self is hugely important to break that cycle of also the historical and cultural understanding of what a woman's life should be and what a man's life should be. Yes, please. Okay, should we switch on the light? I think my light has died now. Yeah. And we could end at a cheerful note. I could talk about how I taught my husband to make a perfect roti. You know? So the Indian bread plays a pivotal role in the life of a South Asian woman. I mean, when I was getting married, my mother made sure I knew how to make a perfectly round bread. That's literally the masculinity and the patriarchy speaking through a piece of roti. And the important thing for me was my daughter to know that it's not only mom's job to make that perfect round roti. So yeah, daughter. Yes.
Thank you for sharing your really personal thoughts. It's really powerful. Could you speak a little bit about how the people that you've done these portraits of, what their reaction has been to seeing themselves or their story depicted like this, starting from you? Like, what has it meant to you to be able to bring these stories to the fore?
I am, Seba, I am still struggling to find my emotions. One thing I have realized is it's very hard to create personal work. It's very hard to distance yourself and bring yourself outside of it and look at it from a third person's eye. So I kept myself out of these stories for the longest of time. And I told myself I'm not a survivor. I kept saying I'm not a survivor. It didn't happen to me. It happened to my mother. So every time somebody would tell me, are you going to put your self-portrait in it? And I was like, no, it didn't happen to me. And I literally would physically push myself away from it and say, it didn't happen to me, it was my mother. And my mother has passed on, so I'm not sharing her story. And then it's sort of, I don't know, there came a point where I started to realize that I cannot be standing outside of this because this is me. Every time I heard a story, I became one with her, each one of the participants. I saw myself in there every single time, and there came a point where I had to stop denying that it is me there as well. So yeah, I brought myself in there. It has been difficult. My father is alive. It's very difficult because I am putting this out there, and he is living in oblivion, he still looks at it and he asks me, oh wow, this is such a great project, how did you even come up with it? And I find it's funny, but you know, that's how the perpetrator's mind works, that they tend to actually forget it, and that adds to the vicious cycle of normalizing it. Every single night the perpetrator does it, and in the morning he forgets, and he asks her to forget it as well by saying, I'm sorry. So, you know, it just reminds you of the cycle. So for my father, he's forgotten it. And so yeah, it's a very difficult sense of emotion. For the other survivors, each one of them are at a different stage of their journey. From my understanding, it was very healing for them, the process of having somebody or a group or a cohort just listening to them and not stopping them and not telling them, oh, it's been an hour, can you just now stop crying, you know. So we did not put a timeline to their grief, we didn't put a timeline to their trauma, and that I think was uplifting and exhilarating in a way for them.
As an artist and facilitator going through that process, how did you look after yourself and protect yourself so that you could do the work with the women?
I'm very grateful to Saima and Saida once again for that. I kept having regular touch points with them to share my story, share what I was going through. Also, it's not just my mental health, it's also the fact that I need to keep judgment out. It's very difficult. You're going into the room to have that conversation. It's very difficult to leave your human side outside. It's very difficult to not judge somebody else's story, even when you want the somebody else not to judge your story. So I had to constantly keep going back to the two of them to remind myself that I have to keep judgment out. I have to constantly keep reminding myself that I have to protect myself in the process as well, and it's so important to talk about it today actually. I mean, Israel, Palestine, as sensitive beings, as people who have experienced trauma and violence, we have a very soft outer covering wherein we tend to attach everybody else's trauma to our being, and we start feeling that this belongs to me as well. And that's been happening to me for the past 12 days, you know. I told my husband day before yesterday, I have been waking up with dreams of being in Gaza. And so yes, through the course of this series, I had to constantly keep tightening that outer layer and telling myself, this is not me, this is not my story. So yeah, it's a conversation with the self again.
I just wanted to ask, thank you, just want to say thank you so much. In terms of your work with these women and this collection of images, and do you see them evolving? Do you see potentially, I don't know, again, sort of jumping into the future, it's saying that these women are at different journeys and different stages of their journey, and how you see either adapting those images, creating new images with them, or looking at another set of women, or potentially using the same methods in a different context. And your relationship, I think you've expressed so much that the actual physicality of you know, and the tactile nature of the work, and how that would maybe fit, and yeah, just how you'd like to see it.
Yes. I mean, so this is an ongoing process. This is a series that will keep going on. So so far we've had conversations, and we've had collective meetings, talks with 21 survivors. So this series so far is based on those narratives. But we are continuing to do that work. We've not put a timeline to their grief. So we are going to continue to do it for as long as it's possible. It's also
come in and say, this is not the end. We are full of ideas. We did our first series called I'm Enough. Main Mukammal, I'm Enough, which we did on a smaller scale with Hounslow Council. We launched it there. We became brave. We've done this as our second one, and we've taken on a bigger platform, and hopefully the next one, which is already in the pipeline, will take us on a different level. We hope to work not just with women, with different generations, with different genders. So yeah, it will grow. And as I said, this is all part of the bigger scheme of raising awareness, raising conversation, and bringing it out there in people's faces to say, this is the different shades, these are the different colors, they exist, they are here. We have to change.
Yeah, we have quite a good amount of ideas in our head. We are working collectively. We want to do workshops with the survivors as well, and perhaps come up with a zine with the effort that, because all of them are so creative, you know. So maybe just have an exhibition of their work at the end, or create a zine, a magazine, or you know, we've got a lot of ideas. We always need funding for that. But we also have a plan of a great sort of performative series that we are thinking of creating with the survivors itself, narrating the life of one survivor, and just like a patterned narrative that does exist, seems to exist mostly.
Theatre production, we're thinking of.
We are thinking of
again, funding dependent.
We are
As
thinking
the
of
funding comes and as we grow, the platforms will change.
We are thinking of a book. And also every time we hear a story, new patterns come up. Like I spoke about how the children are impacted in the relationship. We are also thinking in our minds about a series with the children of families that have experienced abuse. So yeah, there's so much.
But again, with that, you have to be mindful of safeguarding. You have to protect the child in the short term and the long run. Even though we have consent from mother, but is that the consent from the child?
Correct.
So there are different
and consent
elements
changes
and
over time
layers,
as well. Correct.
that we need to be careful about.
Absolutely. Right? Yes, please. I'm so glad we're having these questions. Wow. Thank you so much.
I was just thinking about, you mentioned the link between the diasporan experience and domestic violence, and you know, anyone that is working on any of those types of ideas or research, because I can only, just imagine that there's so much to dig into.
There is so much. There is so much, especially, I mean, with the wars ongoing now, I can assure you the impact is on women the most. I was doing a series on the refugees, the Rohingya refugees. They are one of the largest marginalized community in the world. They are from Myanmar and have been displaced for several years and have been living in different South Asian countries. I went to one of their refugee camp in Delhi in India, and it was shocking to see how within the marginalized community as well, there is multiplicity of marginalization. How the men within the marginalized setup further marginalize their women, and how they inflict abuse upon them because they have this collective anger and they don't know where else to take it. Every time they need to walk a mile to go to a toilet, which the 500 people in that community are using, they get angry and they come back home and they hit their wives. So, you know, every time there is war, there is colonization, or there is some sort of catastrophe, it is the women who bear the brunt of it the most. So unfortunately, from my research, the amount that I was able to do in this year, there is not so much work done in this field, but there is work done. There are articles written and there is some amount of research, but a lot could be done.
There's also, and something that we pick up on and we are working very much on, is generational trauma. Now, generational trauma in terms of, a big percentage of UK population is migrant. So when we migrate from one country to another, the migration trauma that comes with that, where generations in terms of what our parents have seen and the kind of levels of abuse and conditioning that they have experienced, or call it grooming, and how that has filtered down into the next generation. And what we're trying to work and do is to break that cycle, to raise awareness so that we're not making the mistakes that have been made. So yeah, there's lots of literature, there's lots of information around. We talk to lecturers, we are involved in different levels. So yes, our projects will bring out information and knowledge through other mediums and researchers, yeah.
Thank you.
You said that you've worked with Hounslow Council and you get referrals from GPs as well, which kind of implies that there's like a recognition on that level of there being this intersection of like domestic violence and like your kind of ethnic background.
Yeah.
Is that something that you had to convince people of, or was it already there and they contacted your
I think
charity?
COVID has made a big difference, because the research that is coming out of the COVID period is how the minority ethnic community has been marginalized, about how what's happening inside the house or what is happening outside in terms of organization, in terms of discrimination, in terms of understanding is very different. What we're seeing is that there is better awareness within NHS. So we're doing a lot of collaborative programs with NHS where they are coming to us to gather information. So they want to tap into our services to do research for them on, for example, simple things like why don't South Asian, Middle Eastern communities or minority ethnic come forward for their routine screenings? What's stopping them from going for breast screening? Well, let's diagnose that. What stops women from going for breast screening? And we've done a lot of focus group questionnaires, involvement with our women. We've gone and presented our outcomes in various events. So yes, we've seen a change of trend. Yes, we've been talking about it for a long time, although our organization is only new, well, relatively new, and is growing and adapting itself very quickly. Nonetheless, there are minority organizations that have been around for 30 years, for 40 years. Prior to coming to SheWise, I was working for a South Asian refuge called Asha Projects. I have worked with them for 20 years. And the problems that the reason why they came together, those problems still exist. Those barriers still exist. So it's about raising awareness on them and bringing change. But yes, people are taking notice, people are coming to us, people are working. We don't know how long it will last before whatever interest and funding is out there may go away. So we want to make sure we make the most of it by engaging as much as we can in as many ways as we can.